session is Slovakia Fit for 55. By 55, we don't mean the age, but the 55% reduction, obviously, in CO2 as the target of the European Union for 2030. And the title continues, A European Green Deal Balancing Act, the present and future competitiveness of industrial decarbonization. I think the title itself already speaks a lot about what we would like to discuss. The focus is on Slovakia. We know very well that Slovakia is traditionally, historically, one of the most industrial countries in Europe. I think this is a great advantage, or should be an advantage. Of course, one of the challenges we are facing today is how to adjust this very strong industrial focus, which is especially historically in the heavy machinery, heavy industry, which is unfortunately also tends to be CO2 heavy. How do we deal with this issue given all the new regulatory arrangements within the European Union and heavy shift towards European Green Deal and the implications coming out of this, including how does Slovakia deal with the target of being carbon neutral by 2050, and what to do with this situation. I believe this is a challenge, but a good challenge. I think this will be also part of the discussion. This could be an opportunity for the Slovak economy and industry to actually become more competitive by adjusting to these new trends. And we have also excellent speakers who will introduce these topics. I think some of the questions we would like to raise is, on one hand, what is the role of the recovery and resilience plan in this process? What is the strategy? What are the opportunities to bring more green investments and decarbonization into Slovakia? Also, what are the possible reforms in the EU ETS and how to maybe utilize the so-called CBAM or carbon border adjustment mechanism? How we should deal with the carbon pricing regime and in what way should it be revised? And also how European Green Deal helps Slovakia develop technology and innovation and deal with labor reallocation. What are the benchmarks and milestones? So these are some of the issues we'd like to address during this discussion. Again, on behalf of GLOBSEC, I would like to thank all the participants and panelists in particular, and introduce the panelists who are both from the public sector as well as private sector. From the public sector side, we have State Secretary State Secretary is excused. So we have two Director General from the sections in the Ministry of Environment as well as Ministry of Economy. Madam Gabriela Fischerova, who is Director General from the section or division dealing with the climate change in the Ministry of Environment of the Slovak Republic. Welcome. Good afternoon. We have Tomáš Kakula, Director General of the division in the Ministry of Economy of the Slovak Republic dealing with competitiveness.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. From the private sector side, we have Mr. Miroslav Kiralvarga, Vice President in charge of External Affairs, Administration and Business Development from the US Steel, a huge, obviously, company in Košice. Welcome. Welcome. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And we should be joined also by Mr. Ralk Kelle, Head of Sustainability Business Integration from Evonik. So these are our speakers. I would like to start with the public sector speakers first, panelists. Also, I would like to introduce my colleague Nolan.theisen from GLOBSEC, who will then continue with the moderating of the panel and of the discussion. So let's start with Madam Gabriela Fischerova from the Ministry of Environment. And I think obviously you are now in a, I would say, challenging position, how to maybe match the economic interests with the new environmental requirements and policies coming from Europe, and how to make Slovakia really friendly in terms of fulfilling the European criteria. But please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you also to GLOBSEC for organizing this event and inviting Ministry of Environment to the panel. Firstly, I would like to apologize my State Secretary, Mr. Kicha. You know how it is with higher authority. He was called to governmental office unexpectedly, so I have to step in and take his part. So I would take this opportunity to say a few words about how we see all the prospect of decarbonization and climate neutrality in 2050 and Green Deal and Fit for 55 legislation. First of all, as you mentioned, Slovakia is a rather heavily industrialized country, which means that our CO2 intensity per GDP is pretty high. We are sixth country within the EU, and although the figures improved over the last decade, it's still pretty high, and that's why our efforts should be aimed towards industry. More than 41% of total emissions of Slovakia come from industry, including energy, I mean, in the industrial. So it is, I think, quite logical that it takes quite a lot of interest, and also when designing the legislation, when designing new funds or operation of the new funds, and also that's why we are let's say very keen on seeing how the new proposal from European side would be. The package of Fit for 55 should come up in June, which is less than 2 months from now, and we still don't know what it would look like. There are some let's say assumptions, some indications, but what concerns us most is how the ETS scheme would look like in the future, how the non-ETS sector, this ESR regulation would look like, whether how the carbon border adjustment mechanisms would be designed, and also how things would be included into the whole picture. You are probably aware that there was the agreement between Council and Parliament on European climate law, and one of the outcomes or one of the results of the compromise is that the things are rather limited when accounting for 55 target in 2030. What means that the whole EU could account for reduction due to things only to the amount of 225 million tons, which means that even more effort should be directed towards real reductions. Another point which I would mention is that according to our previous and current scenarios and projections, there is no way we can reach this target, even 55, not talking about the climate neutrality in 2050, with business as usual, or let's say without some really significant technological breakthrough. Because even with current technologies, if they are on top of their possibilities and effectiveness, we still have some gaps of from 4 to 7 million tons for climate neutrality, and a bit less for 2050. 2030 target. So that's why we believe that both recovery plan and modernization fund, and to some extent operational program for environment, should lead towards decreasing CO2 or emission intensity in industry and energy sector. Recovery plan, I think everybody is already aware of the document which was sent to the it was already sent to European Commission. Now we are waiting for their comments or their assessment of the plan. When it comes to modernization fund, next week is a deadline for submitting first round of projects or programs or schemes to investment committee. And I'm pleased to say that we are almost ready to submit 2 schemes which we prepared in the last 4 or 5 months. One is for renewable energy sources, electricity production from renewable energy sources, which is managed by Ministry of Economy. And the other one is for central district heating and energy efficiency and district heating network. So this is for us, it's a big step, and I hope we will take our lessons from this first attempt to tap money from modernization fund, and now we can, or let's say that we have now free hands to start with another scheme which would be directed to industry, both for energy and technological improvements. It wouldn't be easy, I have to say. We have to tackle, or we have to fight with all other limitations, especially when it comes to state aid rules, when it comes to competitiveness, transparency, and so on. But I believe that we would be able to present the scheme to the stakeholders or some wider public in, well, now I'm aware that I'm making promises, but let's say that the first draft may be ready some time in July this year. And after that, we would fine-tune the scheme so that we aim to propose it to the next investment committee meeting, which should be held in December. So there is a lot of challenges in front of us, and including recovery funds and reaching this. I have to stress that both targets, 55 in 2030 and climate neutrality in 2050, are extremely ambitious for Slovakia, but they are doable. But we have to bear in mind that we cannot wait until 2020, let's say 8, and then to start to do something, or 2024, and then to assess whether we reach the neutrality or not. We have to start now, and we are doing so also by this webinar. So that's all from my side. I hope I wasn't too long, and if there are any questions, I'll be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Director General. I think that as you mentioned, we have, or Slovakia has now huge opportunity, because I don't remember in the history of Slovakia when there will be so much funds available for different types of reforms, and certainly the European Green Deal agenda is a key element of this. So question is, of course, how to use the money in the best way for the country and for the society. I think I'm very encouraged, as you mentioned, that the first projects under modernization fund are ready, which is a great news. I remember when working at the European Investment Bank, that this was one of the big issues on the discussion. So I'm really encouraged by this. So thank you so much. And of course, I always look at this issue of environmental aspects and reaching environmental goals also through the prism of how do we do it, or how European economies, including Slovak, how they do it in the way which would also increase the competitiveness of the economies. And I think we have a person here who can speak about that and who's actually in charge of this for Slovakia. I would like to introduce Mr. Kakula and ask him, as the Director General for the competition division in the Ministry of Economy, to speak more about the competitiveness aspect of the whole exercise.
Yes, certainly I can do that. Thank you very much, Mr. Huda. Good afternoon to you all. It's been proven that I'm not so high in the hierarchy of our ministry that I haven't been called to another meeting, so I can gladly join you, and it's my honor. I think I will have some permanent place in the GLOBSEC events. It's not the first time, and as far as I can see my calendar, not the last one I'm attending. So you are very active. Well,
and we appreciate it very much. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you will not be overfed with me at some point, but if you will, stop asking me to take part. Anyway, so yes, competitiveness. I would like to make a short statement. I would like to say some key positions from, I believe, not only our ministry, but as I'm looking at Ms. Fischerova as well, the state sector as such. Few comments on Fit to 55 package and maybe some measures we are doing at the moment. So speaking of competitiveness, definitely this is the key. We, especially at the Ministry of Economy, are trying to achieve. The times are challenging, that's for sure, and the twin transition, especially the green one, comes at some cost. But we've been in various fora advocating that competitiveness should be remain and Europe should stay competitive. And we've been also advocating that when designing the policies in Brussels or elsewhere, countries like Slovak Republic are acknowledged that they have slightly different starting position maybe to some other countries. They have different structure of economy, which poses some maybe even higher challenges for us. Speaking of industrialization of our country, 25% of GDP, which definitely puts us in the position that we will maybe likely face some higher carbon leakage possibilities than some other economies more established on services. Speaking of industry, what's crucial to say that we've been always defending, trying our best, the energy intensive industries. Mr. Kiral Varga from US Steel will maybe talk about this later, but we are fully aware that these industries are oftentimes at the beginning of this strategic value chains. And if we want to achieve what's been called lately the strategic autonomy, we cannot lose these industries. It's crucial. Speaking of steel, chemicals, and so on, the green products, the wind turbines, the solar panels, they are all made of metals and plastics and chemicals. So we definitely have to keep our competence to produce these goods and products. The second big issue, or another big issue, is that we cannot be just ourselves in this fight. To put it in perspective, I've read recently that 30% of pollution in San Francisco comes from China. That's clear how we, in a globalized world, we live. And I will say that the first thing we want to avoid is to have clean EU in the dirty world. So we have to do our utmost and force our global competitors to follow the rules and to adopt also strict measures. If this is failing, then we may have some measures how to protect ourselves, and we cannot be shy to use them. Maybe a few words on the Fit to 55 package. I spoke today at different conference in the morning on the chemical industry, and Mr. Mensing, the Director General of CEFIC, said it's a European Chemical Industry Association. He said that the chemical industry fully subscribed to carbon neutrality in 2050. I see a big shift in those kind of statements. As far as I remember the discussion a few years ago, I'm still very young, but I remember some discussions from a few years ago was quite different, where many representatives of industry were saying us, no, we cannot do that, we cannot do that. Now we can see the shift, and most of the time we are hearing this, yes, we can do that, but we need some help from you, from policymakers. We need mostly money, but not always only money. Fit to 55 package could be some, let's say, way how to achieve the carbon neutrality in 2050, or let's say 55% to 2030 and forwards. It will be definitely a huge package, and we, from the point of Ministry of Economy, we will definitely deal with some particular parts of the package, namely CO2 for cars and vans. I don't think I have to underline how critical this could be for us, being an automotive powerhouse, but there are definitely another pieces of legislation that we will take care of, and we will certainly apply the positions I have mentioned earlier, that we cannot allow or we cannot shoot ourselves in the foot, and we need to be realistic, and we need to apply policies that will not hamper the competitiveness, rather enhance them. As for my last part of my short intervention, I will briefly speak of the measures that are currently in place or will be very soon in place in Slovakia that will help especially the industries to deal with the challenges that are ahead of us. First, already have been said, the modernization fund, as far as I know, 1.5 billion euro are more or less or will be ready until 2030. The next big thing is what we've been all discussing for the last couple of months. It's the Recovery and Resilience Fund, where, as I'm sure you are aware, that 37% of the funds should be channeled to the climate change action. In Slovakia, that translates to almost 2.2 billion euros. From those, 350 million will be dedicated specifically to the decarbonization of industry. We will support the green innovation and development of new green technologies in the amount of 140 million. We will support alternative fuel infrastructure in the amount of 50 million, renewable energy sources, 220 million, building renovation, almost 700 million. So there are huge money will be spent will be spent on moving the economy towards green. I will admit that maybe we would hope for more channeling more funds towards the industry themselves, but I think this is the only beginning, and I will underline everywhere that the Recovery and Resilience Fund is just a company, or is a complementary to, let's say, the regular structural funds. And as you may know, the 13 billion coming from the multi-annual financial framework 21-27, 20% of those money should be also channeled towards the green economy. There is also Just Transition Fund. So I believe that the palette of incentives or mitigating measures or supporting measures is quite broad. And I can also name projects of important projects of common European interest, so-called IPCEIs, where Slovakia is also active, being in the battery fields with 4 already notified projects, or the upcoming hydrogen activities with 15 projects in the pipeline. So I would like to illustrate that with my speech, that on one hand, we clearly see the challenges. Some may call it challenge, some may call it opportunities, but we as a policymakers, I believe we do our best to provide as much support for the companies and for the system in order to master the challenges that are definitely ahead of us all. So that will be all from me. If I'm not sure if we are able, or if we have place for any questions, but if so, then I'm more than happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kakula, and thank you for a clear description of how Slovakia is trying to manage this challenge of being both environmentally friendly and responsible, but also keeping competitive. I was actually impressed when I saw, I think it was 4 IPCEI projects which were approved in the last so-called battery package. For me, it shows that Slovak economy can innovate, and when it is kind of challenged by the new situation, it can actually move in a new way. And of course, now with the hydrogen IPCEI package, this could be again hopefully repeated. So thank you so much for your coverage from the side of the Ministry of Economy. And now let's move to the private sector panel, or part of the panel from the private sector representatives. And by the way, we keep the questions after the panelists from both public and private sector speak. So if you can stay with us until the question time. But I would like to introduce now Mr. Miroslav Kiral-Varga, who is Vice President of the US Steel in Košice, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, private sector employer in Slovakia. For me, US Steel is kind of very visible test case of how it is possible to combine the environmental adjustments with competitiveness, of keeping competitive. We know that competition from China, from etc., which are big steel producing nations, is very tough, and being outside of the EU requirements in terms of environmental aspects, of course, they can be much cheaper in terms of the cost of production than in Europe. So it is a global industry, very open, and US Steel in Košice has to deal with this. So, Mr. Kiral-Varga, if you could maybe show us how US Steel is going to deal with this situation, and what are the challenges, and maybe where there are opportunities for support and cooperation with public sector, with the government.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to organizer who provided me a chance to participate on this discussion, which is very interesting. And this is my favorite type of discussion, because if I'm not the first who is speaking, I can make my notes and make a reaction on what has been said already. So I don't need to be prepared if I'm not the first speaker in the panel or in that type of discussion. So thank you for that. So what has been said already, I should say that the steel is the central to the EU economy, and it underpins the development of major manufacturing sectors right along the value chain. Our industry sustains 2.6 direct and indirect jobs in the EU. To make the EU's recovery plan and green transition success, a Green Deal on steel should be agreed between EU steel industry and EU institutions and governments with a clear action plan, establishing a market for green steel in the period of 2021 to 2030. The significantly advanced for the steel is that EU's climate change or climate objectives is that it concentrates CO2 emissions in a limited number of installations, covering about 25% of the EU industrial and 5% of EU total CO2 emission. As Mrs. Fischerova mentioned, in Slovakia, it represents more than 41% of the total emission belongs to industry, including the energy sector. Steel is a strategic sector producing 100% recyclable circular materials for EU key industries such as automotive, mechanical engineering, construction, household, medical devices, sanitary, and etc. We welcome that the approach of the German, that under the German EU presidency, they setting out an action concept for the steel industry. And even today, there was again publicly mentioned that Germany is ready to spend over $6 billion to clean up steel production in their country. I would say, wow, and I do believe that other member states of the EU will follow that example. As all of us knew, there is a EU ETS scheme in place, which we understand that scheme is to protect the carbon leakage out from the EU. So leakage of the production, which is the emitter of the greenhouse gases. If I'm looking over the globe map, the EU ETS is the most extended system which is already in place or in force, working for a couple of years. Then we have a category which is under the consideration, which is small part of the world, and the biggest part of the world is under the development is the second, and under the consideration is the third one. And of course, the under the development is the whole the China and India, and under the consideration is South America and even the Balkan area and the South Asia part. So what I'm trying to get by this comment is that the next mechanism or system which is under the discussion and should be adopted is already mentioned CBAM, which is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which in my eyes, in my understanding, is the mechanism to prevent the imports from the third countries into our home market, which does not include the CO2 cost in their production, because that import should be treated as a dumped imports and should be somehow prevented, and safeguard should be in a place. So our industry is in favor of both systems, including the EU ETS with free allocation for domestic producer and CBAM, that mechanism, which is helping to prevent to imports the dump products. Going to Slovakia situation, as already mentioned by both representatives from the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Economy, speaking about the state aid scheme, which Mrs. Fischerova mentioned, we welcome that they move on with that, and they are coming to be ready for providing the approved state aid scheme for renewable sector, for central heating system, and ready to start up working on the state aid scheme for industry and technology improvements. I think that yes, modernization fund is one of the most important fund, which is constructed in Slovakia, is one of the 10 countries, I think, within the EU, and should be used transparently, properly, and for the benefit of the country and benefit of the next generation. The same approach should be with a resilience and recovery plan or fund, if you want. But as you know, that fund and all the money allocated based what we all know, it is something which is payable by next generations. So we should be very smart and very reasonable that any kind of money allocated based on that plan and spent in the future should be reasonably spent and with some kind of return on investment, if it's possible, of course. We are talking about the reforms under the state area, like the justice reform, the health system reform, pension system reform. I fully agree and support that, but talking about the investment into the either private or public sector, we should be looking over the return on investment for the next generation. And going deeply into that, as Mr. Kakula mentioned, the green economy, 37% allocated money, that's something which we all are supporting. And we should be aware that those projects must be supported by the EU/public money, because those investments are investment forced by the EU legislation. We all know that the outcome from that should be meeting the target 2030 and 2050. But it's not only the meeting target, but it's also about the clear and more healthy environment we experience for us and for our generation. So we cannot force the industry to take that investment only by their shoulders, because forced investment by these environmental legislation, as I mentioned, I need to repeat that again, should be co-financed by the public and EU funds. And that would help the industry to spend their money and push them to spend their money for market-driven projects, because our industry within the EU must be, for a long period of time, competitive enough to be ready to compete in our home market and compete on the market outside of the EU. So to finish my introductory speech, I would say that one of my colleagues used to say, no lunch is for free. So we know that we have to spend money. We know how much money we can spend and from which sources, but we have to be very reasonable, and we have to be aware that spend money should bring money again in the future. So thank you for giving me that opportunity, and any kind of question, I do hope that I'll be able to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I think your message is very clear, and to deal with such a huge transformation as US Steel in Košice has to undertake, obviously it requires very strong partnership between the government and the industry. As we mentioned already several times, there is a lot of money now available to public sector, to government, and it is an opportunity to create real partnerships to utilize these funds to make the economy competitive and support such important companies as US Steel. So I think this is a good thing, and as you mentioned, there is no lunch for free. So we have to find a way how to use the money in the most productive way. Now I would like to, and unfortunately I have to run, frankly, to my flight here in Istanbul, but I would like to give the word to my colleague nolan.theisen, who will continue with the panel, and with Mr. Ralph Kelle, and also try to finish, as we promised to you, by 3 p.m. Central Europe time. So if you could stay with us for 15 more minutes, we would really appreciate that. But unfortunately, I have to run to the gate. Have a wonderful end of the discussion. Thank you again, and I'm sure we'll see each other sometime soon. Nolan, please, you have the word.
Thank
Have
you.
a safe flight.
Safe flight, Basil.
Thank you.
Always the jet setter, even during COVID. So let me very quickly, first of all, yes, thanks again to Mr. Kirovarga for the intervention. And I would turn to our last private sector speakers from the Ivonique, Mr. Rock Kelly, the head of sustainability for business integration. Mr. Kelly, can you hear me? Are you with us? I think he was joining by phone. Okay, so we can give him a few minutes. But in the meantime, we do, as Basil mentioned, we have 15 minutes and...
Nolan, can you hear me?
There we are, yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
Please.
thank you very much. I make that short because I know you want discussion, yeah? Thanks for the opportunity. Maybe our perspective on this, Evonik is a specialty chemical company, globally operating. I can relate to many topics that have been said so far. I think if we look at this from an opportunity perspective, we see the decarbonization also as an opportunity for new products and new processes. And what brings me, I guess, to this round is our engagement in Slovakia with our Pharmas team, which has been the tail of many of our biotech processes. And biotechnology manufacturing is probably the one technology area that will benefit a lot from the availability of very competitive renewable electricity. And in all the analysis we do, and as a chemical industry, we know we have a difficult journey ahead of us. All the measures with the least cost, least abatement cost, are usually the ones which are driven by the availability of competitive renewable electricity. And this will create a push for biotechnology manufacturing because it uses a high share of this kind of energy. And another driver for this development is also that several of our customer industries want to get out of fossil-based ingredients and products. I guess a recent example of this is Unilever, who says, I want to get out of fossil-based surfactants in all of our cleaning products. They have a very clear agenda. And we also in our Pharmas team in Slovakia work on developing a process which is more or less a new platform with a new set of raw materials and a new technology. And I think the last comment I would also echo Mr. Kirovarga that at the end it will be really important that we remain competitive on a global scale. And I think a key for competitiveness will be a low price of renewable energy. And I think I leave it there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. And I think that's an excellent point to take us into the discussion. And we have a good 10 minutes now. So let me just welcome any questions from our audience. If you could raise a hand or feel free to enter a text. And I do see a hand here from Ben McWilliams with Bruegel. And I believe you have sort of a new kind of auction scheme proposal from Bruegel that you might like to introduce and perhaps receive some feedback from our excellent panel here. So Ben, you can unmute yourself and the floor is yours.
Thanks. I was just transitioning. Thanks, Nolan. Yeah, so I'm Ben from Bruegel, a think tank in Brussels, and I would have a 1-2 minute proposal on a scheme which I would welcome feedback on. So We are producing a paper looking into carbon contracts for difference. So not so new, but now again becoming hot in the discussion. As Miroslav was earlier referencing the Germans and their support for steel, this is going to be quite central, I think, to their support. Carbon contracts for difference being similar to the renewable contracts for difference for electricity. You set a strike price for a low carbon project, and then the state makes up this gap between whatever the prevailing market price is and the strike price. In renewable electricity auctions, the price would be the electricity price. We propose carbon contracts for difference, where the price would be the carbon price, the ETS price. So you sign a contract with a low carbon project, and you offer them 80 euros per ton carbon. And the way that this annual subsidy works is based upon the amount of production from the site. And then you pay the segment between whatever the average annual ETS price was and the carbon price. And our proposal, which we want to put forward, is for this kind of scheme to exist at the European level and based upon the principle of auctioning. So ideally, grouping as many sectors as is possible together, recognizing that you can't put every single sector together because they have quite different marginal abatement costs. So you can't put cement with production of hydrogen, for example, because then it's difficult for them to compete, but that you might create groups of technologies or sectors that have similar abatement costs, ideally at the European level, which will create significant competition, and that then you would allow them to compete for these carbon contracts for difference issued at the European level. Yeah, for many reasons, we think it's attractive, it's competitive, it's dynamic, the prices, as the ETS price increases over time, the amount of subsidy decreases, which is a nice option compared to what we see now with renewables. And yeah, politically, of course, difficult to pass at the European level, but we were interested to hear the opinions of Slovakia on this, whether this would be something that is possible, would be open to. Potentially, we thought it might be quite attractive because there's the possibility that there are lower marginal abatement costs in Central Eastern Europe compared to Western Europe. So you might see a competitive process quite in favor of countries in Central Eastern Europe. So yeah, basically would welcome any comments or thoughts on this proposal. Thanks, Noel.
Thank you, Ben. Would any of our panelists like to respond to this competitive auction proposal for CEE? Or maybe we can take another question. I was just going to maybe raise one European Green Deal mechanism that hasn't been mentioned yet, which is of course the Just Transition Fund. We've talked about the importance of modernization fund, of course the recovery, Next Gen EU, and then looking ahead to the next tranche of cohesion funds. But one key area, obviously, I think, is kind of the social aspect of industry transition, not unlike coal regions, not unlike the automotive industry, and the winners and losers of this wider energy transition. So maybe I would just, raise the just transition as well to our panelists, and if anybody would like to comment more on kind of the labor aspect, the social transition, and then also this competitive market-based mechanism to start. And we just have a few minutes, 5 minutes, so maybe kind of responding, closing remarks, and we can get out of here on time.
May I react?
Please, Ms. Fischer, please.
It's very hard to react on something you hear for the first time. I mean, the competitive scheme for, I have to say, I didn't totally caught up what it is about. But it looks like very nice theoretical exercise so far. Frankly speaking, all subsidies, I don't like subsidies, and so my first reaction is no. Well, but that's just intuition, I have to say. So I would very much like to see more details and how it works, and what are the benefits and pros and cons. But my main concern is on administrative burden for both state regulator and also private companies. One issue, and the second issue is how to say it diplomatically and politely, how to avoid double counting, misusing, and all these things we saw, for instance, with ETS, all these carousel trades and so on. So these are tricky issues, and as usual, the devil's in the details. So before giving any position about it, we definitely need to know more, and also how it fits to other, let's say, measures, other, for instance, for renewable energy sources, you have so many limitations and sometimes competing goals and regulations and so on. So you have to fit smoothly to all these different and difficult environment, not to cause more harm than good.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Fischerova. So we will certainly be following up with you and with the Bruegel team, and I think that's the idea, is to get everyone talking about this, and let's see maybe if there is some application.
Short reaction from my side. I will fully admit that I received yesterday a presentation on this issue, but to be frank with you, I had just a few moments to glide through it, and I'm not sure if I get all of it. It definitely, well, there were definitely the nice buzzwords we in general administrative of economy wants to see, but as we say always, the devil's in the details. So but the right buzzwords were like the competitiveness process, the bidding procedure, and so on, where, for instance, in the Recovery and Resilience Fund, we actually initially proposed the competitiveness mechanism where the projects will be evaluated on the mainly on the price of reduction of 1 ton of CO2. So this will allow us to get as much reduction of CO2 for as little money as possible, which, well, maybe we will, as far as the monetary point of view, we will grab the low-hanging fruit, but we consider this like the great value for money, or the best value for money retention for this kind of type of funding. So, well, to assess this mechanism, I have to say that I will also need some further details, but well, for now, I will say that it may be, from our point of view, is worth of exploring. I can definitely see some maybe political challenges when introducing this scheme EU-wide, which is always a big thing and challenging thing. You may know that as well. So, but I will definitely be ready to discover more details on this proposal. So thank you for that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Kakula. And any other reactions, please, Mr. Kirovaga?
Yeah, thank you. Very quick reaction. I'm not going to react on that what Ben mentioned, because my predecessor already made some comments, and you raised the question about the Just Transition Fund. So very quickly and briefly on Just Transition Fund, that the amount of money allocated for that fund is slightly below 500 million here in Slovakia. And as you correctly mentioned, that money should be used to offset some kind of social impact by closing, using the coal, either in the coal mines or using the coal in industrial base. The majority of that money, based on my understanding, should be used for that region of brown coal in Slovakia, and try to find a way, or the best way, how to provide a different type of jobs for people who are working over there right now. As we all know, the target timeline is 2023, when the brown coal should be closed, and also the Slovak power plant should not be using that coal to generate the electricity, the power, and the rest of the money should be used for a different location, including the east part of Slovakia. But from the money point of view, again, we see that the intention is to use offset that social impact. So any kind of project which brings a lower number or less number of jobs, that money should be used to create the new jobs, more green jobs for those people. So we are supporting that, but again, the same as with other funds, which we already mentioned, those money should be paid back in the future. So should bring some benefit for the location, for the company, for Slovakia. So that's number one. And number two, 30 seconds to any kind of compensation, state subsidy, rebate. I mean, if we compare the west part of Europe with the east part of Europe, or central and east, here in Slovakia, we can say the energy intensive industry is bleeding by paying the burden, the tariffs on top of the regular price of electricity, because we are supporting the renewables, which is not the case in the west part of the Europe, because we had the analysis, we had the study. So when we compare that, our competitiveness is going down. So we are calling for any kind of measure which can compare electricity price here in east part of Europe with the west part of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kirovaga. And any last word from Mr. Kelle? Did you want to comment on that, or we have 1 minute for you, perhaps? Otherwise, yes.
No, nothing to add from my side.
Okay. Well, in that case, we're 2 minutes over. Please allow me to thank all of our wonderful panelists today. Very much appreciated, speaking on such a complex, sensitive topic. We are looking forward, of course, to the revised European Commission package in June, which also happens to be when our GLOBSEC forum is taking place. And I would just say that this has been rescheduled and confirmed for the middle of June, beginning on the 15th. And we will certainly carry on this very important conversation about the CBAM, about EU industrial policy, hopefully reacting to the revised proposal from the European Commission. So in a sense, this is just kind of an appetizer, a warm-up, and we certainly hope to see you in June. And we will follow up with a summary of this discussion, as well as an issue paper. And yes, just thank you so much for taking your time to join us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. So see you then.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Ciao.
Thank you.
For having us. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.